So look, Chris, thank you very much for giving up your time to come and speak to us and tell us about your career journey and share some of your wisdom for people either in mid-flight of their career or wanting to start out. So I suppose at the start of attend, do you want to just give us a bit of an introduction as to who you are, what you're doing at the moment, and then we'll kind of rewind the clock way back to 2000, I think it was.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here, Carl. So I'm Senior Director of Applications Development for a company called Broadridge, FCS. Not many people would know about them per se. We're not really a consumer brand, but it's a global multinational fintech. We do a lot of work in the space between businesses, particularly where, the one way of thinking about it is you've got lots of financial services companies. They might do a particular thing in-house, and if you've got 10 companies doing that thing, they're all going to do it to a slightly different standard. They're all you're gonna end up paying for it, between all those people. Whereas a company like Broadridge can come along and basically do that for them. And the advantage being they'll drive up the standards because they're the ones that are doing it. They're the experts, and they can drive down the cost as well. So it's a win-win for everyone. And, a company like Broadridge have built a very successful business model around that. So I've been there I've been there. I've been obviously working from home for the last 2 years. But I've been there for the last 3 years now. We were acquired from a company called Hargreaves Lansdown that are also based in Bristol.
Sounds good. So I suppose, look, it'd be really interesting to get on to talking about what you're doing at the moment, the size of teams and sort of how you got there. But I think what's always really good is to kind of cast the time back to when you first started out. So sort of by the looks of it, university in 2000. So was it always kind of IT was the career path you wanted to go down? If you can remember back to when you were in sixth form, what were you thinking of, and how did you end up sort of doing what you were doing?
Yeah, no, I won't tell you what I was thinking about in the sixth form, but it wasn't IT. I did a law degree actually. So I went to Bristol Uni, and I wasn't thinking about a career in IT. It wasn't really one of those roles that you thought of as much. I guess developer roles are much more mainstream these days. So back then I did do a A-level in computer science. So that's what piqued my interest a bit. We were doing Turbo Pascal and Delphi and various other teaching languages, and it was quite cool. But then I went and did my law degree, and I thought at the end of it, do I want to go off and be a lawyer, sort of follow that path, or do I want to have another year's worth of fun in university and prolong the inevitable? So I took another course in uni. I took a compressed master's in computer science. So I was fortunate enough to get the chance to do that, and at the end of it, I couldn't go and do my legal practice course because the timings just didn't work. So I did a year in industry, and I never looked back. I ended up staying.
Fair play. So what made you, out of curiosity, then, sort of, I guess, committing to do a law degree is probably quite a time-consuming thing and a lot of time and effort. I'm sure it's not the easiest degree out there. So why finish that and then go right masters computer science? Because that's quite different, in my opinion. I might be wrong. You might tell me it's really similar, Carl, but
no, they're completely different. I was keeping my options open, so I was fully committed to go back and do legal practice. But then, it was around about the time. You think what was happening back then? There were things like Napster. There was the dot-com bubble. Companies like Facebook were just starting off. And it seemed like an interesting area to go into that not many other people were going into. So I think it was kind of a combination of luck and I wouldn't say I was a visionary or anything. So I kind of fell into it really. Did a year's worth of industry work, working for small enterprises, doing PHP roles, a bit of JSP. I don't think you even see JSP roles anymore. And then once I was there, I thought, right, okay, well, if I'm gonna make this my career, how can I grow? Doing the kind of the roles that I started off doing wasn't terribly beneficial. You know, I was getting paid for writing code, but it was really sloppy stuff. You
Mhm.
know, I set my sights on starting to work for better companies, which not better in you know, not nothing against those first companies, but they weren't software houses, they weren't, you know, teams developers working together. So
Yeah.
I had to put a plan in place to try and to grow and to get out of that and to build my career up from there.
So was that where the first one was then Oyster Bay as a .NET developer?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So Oyster Bay were interesting. You know, I learned a lot, very fixed time projects. You know, like they're an agency essentially,
Yeah.
uh, a boutique sort of software house, which have quite a few well-regarded names in the leasing industry. And, you know, I started working in teams. I started using source control for the first time, you know, and stuff like that. Um, Started in .NET 1 back then, and yeah, I benefited a lot from that. I think I was there for about 3 years. I would say to people, you know, if they're starting out, is, you know, it's not just about coding, right? As an engineer, you need to be exposed to different environments where people are doing different things with different constraints. And one of the constraints that an agency has is time. So whilst you might get very good at doing projects and throwing things out the door, you know, that's obviously one side of the skill set.
Yeah, yeah.
But then you're not going to be exposed to some of the other sides, like, you know, how do you manage tech debt? You're never going to have time to do tech debt in that environment. How do you make your code more testable? You know, there probably isn't enough time to do that in that environment. So that's why I would say, you know, you do need to move around.
Mhm. And then one of the interesting questions I always love asking people like yourself is obviously first role, commercial role, then focused on .NET. So some of the things I kind of spoke about with some of the more juniors or people kind of wanting to make that transition into software engineering, they kind of ask me and kind of go, well, what language should I focus on? Should I pick a language, or what did you pick .NET, or was that the right role, the right company, and it just so happened to be that, or what was
Yep.
the rationale behind it?
Um, .NET was just starting out, and, you know, I didn't think I was going to get a role in a company like OBS. I thought, well, you know, I haven't got any experience really in this language. I can tell them what I've done in PHP for a couple of years commercially. Most people back then were working in Java, you know, and I thought, is this a mistake? You know, but they, you know, they were willing to take a risk, and that's what I would tell candidates as well. You know, you'd be surprised. Companies are looking for people. You know, at the end of the day, you can always teach skills if you've got the right candidate. Now, that's not always a winning strategy. You know, people get knocked back, and people don't always, you know, get the roles that they want. But you should always try. And you know, I was lucky enough to do .NET. Didn't know if it would come to anything. You know what? But it certainly became the behemoth that it has become. You know, the big programming language that it has become.
So I was kind of just putting your hat on now as kind of the senior director of Broadridge where you are. So I'm assuming you guys hire kind of graduate and entry level software engineers. So I suppose, and what do you look for in that? And if we're saying it's kind of look, hey, look, you don't have to have the commercial experience, or maybe if you've actually done a couple of years coding in, I don't know, PHP or Java or something like that, but you're a Microsoft house, .NET, Azure. How does someone walk through that interview process and give themselves a good enough chance to someone with the same amount of experience, but with that tech stack?
It's always about somebody's temperament and their personality and their willingness to learn. I've in my past role, I was helping to run various graduate schemes, and the guys coming into the schemes didn't have any computer. I remember one guy, he didn't even know how to turn a computer on. Um, and we spent a lot of time with them initially. We did like almost a bit like The Apprentice, we didn't just do interviews with people. We had them, we kind of booked a hotel conference room for the day, and we would spend a whole day narrowing people down, a bit like the X Factor, just getting to know them, giving them different kinds of problem challenges, seeing how they worked well together. I mean, you've got to be paying attention as well, because it's not always going to be the most vocal people that you want. Programmers can be a little bit introvert, or aspiring programmers can be. So sometimes as well, if you're doing a program like that, you're thinking about the composition of the group. So you may want, a slightly more vocal person working well with a slightly quieter person. But that's just one part of people's personas. You're looking at people in the round. If they've really got no pre-existing skills, you've got to major into their personality. And maybe that's the purest way of doing it. When we did those schemes, we had a very, very high retention rate, multi-year. And I think that was testament to the people that we picked, but also the loyalty that they showed us as well for taking a risk on them.
No, that sounds really good. And I think I'll push on that a little bit more a bit later on, because some of the stuff I'm really interested to hear is kind of like opinions around kind of the boot camps now we're seeing, kind of career changes and how we do that. But kind of rewinding the clock back to you then, so kind of 2.5 years at OBS, and then you ended up at a pretty well-known tech business called Confused.com. So how did you go from sort of a developer to a team lead in, I suppose, probably wasn't quite such a well-known tech business back in 2009, but from knowing the business, there were some pretty heavy-hitting names involved in that. So it was fairly obvious it was going to go in places. So did you get a tap on the shoulder? Did you apply for it? How did you market yourself to kind of go into probably, which was a fairly high-profile role?
Yeah, I didn't go. I think I applied as a developer, so I only got the team lead role about 6 months in. I mean, I tell you what, Confused, it was carnage. They were one of those companies that had really fast growth, really fast scale up. That you hear about them. There are companies you could point people to at the moment, that are going for IPO and stuff like that. They're slightly different because they were owned by the Admiral Group, but they had a dominant market position, and they were diversifying the product range beyond just car insurance. They needed developers. I think I was the one that applied, and I was fortunate to get taken on. I can't remember much about the interview other than something like to do with Russian dolls that I couldn't answer. It was interesting, actually. The guy who interviewed me, who's now the CTO there, was one of the founders, and he sold me the role totally. And I learned a lot just from his interactions, because he was, you could tell he was really invested in the company, and he really was keen to see it succeed. But the reason I say it was carnage, the average age was probably late 20s, early 30s, and that included the exec level. The very young people there making big decisions with, throwing money at big advertising launches, some of which didn't work. More importantly, from the tech perspective, it was very, very strong technical team who were able to really leverage Microsoft technologies to the full, making simple decisions about, we're going to be a .NET house. We're going to do everything to the best standards. We're going to use test-driven development. And it was good, actually, because later on in the journey, the market got quite saturated. You had the Meerkats, you had GoCo, you had Money Supermarket. So you could still make a lot of revenue, but it was pretty much whoever shouted loudest in the adverts. So we were trying to make the most out of every customer journey, because you'd make revenue per customers. So very low tolerance to downtime with the software. We learned how to make it really resilient. And we did a lot of cutting edge things, started to do things with machine learning. So it was a great great experience. I stayed there for 10 years, most of which because they were such a good employer as well. So big investment from Admiral, who are consistently in the Sunday Times best places to work.
Yeah.
Even everyone who works in Admiral, even if you've just started in the call center, gets treated really, really well. And I think that's it's a great ethos to learn as well as the technology.
Definitely. And so again, your opinion on this would be really good. So again, a number of the conversations we have and speak to people in the market about is kind of how long do I stay somewhere before I kind of can move on, or is staying somewhere too long the wrong thing to do? Or because everyone wants to be promoted, right? And I think my opinion and speaking to other people is much harder to get an external promotion, i.e. moving from job A to job B and getting a promotion to do that. But I think we're kind of, especially in the software engineering market over the last couple of years, 2 to 3 years is pretty good tenure. So you did 10 years there, and you kind of got promoted to head of web development, which for Confused.com I imagine was a pretty high profile role internally. So how did you navigate that? What did you do? And obviously now you've left there 10 years looking back at that one place. You've done it differently, would you not? Did you make the right decisions?
I think I probably stayed there a little bit too long. I think for the last few years, I felt like I wasn't really growing, but I was still having a good time. So I was always conscious of, is this going to harm my career being there for too long? And, to kind of contradict what I was saying earlier, about moving around, by not moving around, are you not learning? Are you stifling growth? I think at the other extreme, as a hiring manager, if I see people with CVs and they've been job hopping, 4 or 5 times, that's a red flag for me, because I wonder, well, what does that say about the candidate? Is it it can't be a problem with all those roles, right? It's there must be something going on there. So I think you hit the nail on the head. 3 years, maybe I think people, up until recently, there was some stigma with job hopping. I guess all the rules are out of the window at the moment with the current market. So I don't know. Yeah, 3 years maybe. But then, to answer your question about growth, how to navigate growth in a company is a difficult one, because companies do tend to promote for certain roles externally as well. We were fortunate and Confused that didn't happen very frequently. So Confused had a big commitment to existing staff and to grow in them. So I think that was probably part of my fortune, really, that they didn't do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes absolute sense. So from Confused into Hargreaves Lansdown, again, another super well-known business in the Southwest, and then taken over by Broadridge, which, for people that know Broadridge, huge American fintech firm. I was wondering, has it always appealed to you to kind of work for the bigger companies then? Because again, that's some of the things I always like to kind of get people's opinions on, is kind of, I guess when you join Confused, whilst they had the backing of Admiral, much smaller, much more agile, as you said, leadership team that were always making different decisions, I imagine, shooting around in different directions to, again, I might be wrong, but you imagine a big American fintech firm, a bit like an oil tanker. I might be wrong, but I guess what's your views on that? And what advice would you give to people kind of thinking about, well, which way is the right way to go, or what are the pros and cons of either or?
Yeah, it wasn't really an either or with Confused, because we had some of the benefits of a small company. We were only about 200 staff. We were owned by the wider Admiral Group. So we had the benefits of both. We could make our own decisions at the local level. We didn't get dictated to about what technology we used by Admiral, for example. But we had all the advantages, like we were Admiral shareholders, so we were Admiral employees. So I looked for something similar, which is when I moved to Funds Library. So Funds Library were the company that HL owned. And again, very similar, small size, many of the perks of being able to go your own way technology wise. So rather than join a startup, which didn't appeal to me, I'm not saying I got anything against startups, but this stage of my life, I value the the solvency of a company, you know, and making sure that I do get paid. And then having the back end of HL and knowing that, you know, even if Funds Library had a bad year, you know, you've always got a gorilla in the corner looking out for you.
Yeah.
Now that's purely my opinion. You know, I would say to people, you know, there are plenty of good fintechs, there are plenty of good startups, right? So why wouldn't you join a company that you thought was good, that you met the people on, you know, do reverse interviews, of course, and find out who you're going to be working with. That's the most important thing. But you know, these days there's so much VC money, you know, there's so many people throwing money at stuff. It doesn't seem as much of a risk. I mean, you could have ended up working in an energy firm in Bristol and not foreseen the energy crisis, right?
Yeah.
Everything is just topsy-turvy at the moment.
Yeah, very true indeed. So I suppose Broadridge, or Funds Library first as head of DevOps, then sort of moved over into the role you're in now. So I suppose are you able just to share with people then sort of a bit of that journey, sort of the size and team? Because for those of you that kind of follow TekCurious and us, you very kindly did our first ever TekCurious talk way back, I think in August 2019. And I remember you mapped out this very exciting journey you guys were going to be going on and moving into your whole built from scratch as your environment. So talk us through some of that with what, 2.5, 3 years of hindsight.
Yeah, it was great. I fondly remember doing that because we did it with the DevOps group, didn't we? It was a great opportunity for me to network because I'd come to Bristol. I remember we had coffee, um, you know, shortly after I came to Bristol, and I, I didn't know the local landscape as much as South Wales. And when I was in Confused, I was quite active in things like the National Software Academy and various other extracurricular initiatives, you know, some technology user groups and things like that. So I had a bit of a network, but I just didn't know the landscape in Bristol. So again, you know, I think when you're asking how to grow as an engineer, you know, as you go into more senior leadership roles, it is more and more important to build relationships. It's proportionately harder, I think, to find and secure those senior level jobs unless you can market yourself and build those relationships. So I certainly didn't premeditate the move into Funds Library. It was actually your colleague Chad who tapped me up. So yeah, it is about relationship building, but at that stage, yeah, I took the role. I think what got me the role was the experience in Azure, which we had from Confused. So they were looking for somebody who had experience with not just the development side, but the operation side. So that's why the head of DevOps role came about. We did a lot of interesting stuff in that first year. We learned a lot of lessons really quickly, and by the October November time, we were setting ourselves. Not many people knew this, but we were setting ourselves up to get acquired as well. So really, really busy first year. And then by the next March, we were acquired. We 2P'd the staff, and it coincided with the week of the first lockdown. So it was you know, really intense time. And then since we've been locked down, you know, we've merged with another company in Dublin. So there's two quite different cultures, quite different businesses having to come together. We've got a strong presence in India as well, so we like tri-site. Plus, we have a lot of dealings with kind of, I suppose you'd call them head office in the States.
Yeah.
So it's changed a lot. For anyone who would have remembered the Funds Library company, it's probably barely recognizable now for all those reasons. You know, the technology has moved on. Many of the staff have either you know, grown in their roles and taken on different roles, or new people have come in and they've changed. You know, we've changed some of the staff over, and you know, the combination of the two different businesses and really relying on international resource as well has made it a very, very different company. I don't think many companies go through as big a transition as we have in the last 3 years, put it that way.
No, well, it's been impressive to watch from the sidelines, sort of since you started there and seeing the changes. I think that one of the things that people are interested to hear, and especially kind of probably peers to you and as a big business. I mean, how are you guys kind of facing what we're dealing with at the moment in terms of kind of the war for talent, trying to strike that right balance between remote working, developing teams? Because I think, and you guys might have the answer to this, but I suppose from an outsider looking in, you kind of go, all well and good, mid to senior people love working from home, it works really well, perfect. But you look at these kind of grads and lower level roles. How are you trying to strike that right balance? How are you finding it? What are are there any secret sources you're using, Chris, that you're able to share?
I wish I had the answer. I don't think many people do. I think the things that we've done well are, we call it the connected workplace policy. Broadridge have basically made it part of their culture that we have this thing called the service profit chain, which is, look, we can't do anything without our staff. Our staff come first and foremost, and they did during COVID. Everything was done with staff first. But the service profit chain basically means that if you put your staff in the driving seat, trust your staff, you empower them, you look after them, they will in turn look after your clients. And if your clients are looked after, you improve the bottom line, and it's a virtuous circle because everybody gets paid a bit more. So that's the service profit chain. And to bring that to life in the connected workplace and what we do about COVID, they've basically said, right from the top, we're not going to impose any fixed time or days in the office. We think that would be a mistake. We trust people to get things done by outcome rather than output. And for that reason, we've told our staff within our teams, look, try and decide it on a team by team basis. What works for one team might be completely different to what works for another team. You may have a team, like you say, which has a lot of more junior developers. They might be new to the workforce. They may be based themselves in the city centre, in a flat in the city centre. So it's super convenient. There's no childcare. They want to be in the office 4 or 5 times a week. We will try and cater for that. Likewise, the guys who probably, don't want to come in as much. They value the lack of commute. They value the flexibility of the childcare and stuff. Then we can cater for that as well, because we've given this flexibility and really kind of made it a decision, push the decision making downwards on the teams.
Yeah, makes sense. And I suppose, and again, I guess if you cast your mind back to when you were kind of confused, and I'm a shit. So it was Andrew, I guess, who interviewed you, and then the CTO. So, and I'm sure, kind of, I imagine you'd attribute a fair bit of your success to working with him, listening to him, observing him in meetings to see how he interacted with people, and probably a lot of people say this, and I'm sure you may be the same, but kind of muscling your way into interviews, into meetings that maybe you might not have got a seat at the table at, but to kind of watch and learn and develop yourself. But I suppose for kind of this new world we find ourselves in, that's really tough to do, because you can't just rock up to a Teams meeting and invite yourself to it. So what kind of advice would you give to somebody who wants to kind of get to that head of director level role, but to kind of learn some of those skills that they just aren't there anymore, because you can't just rock up to your manager's desk, oh, can I come and listen to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's several things. How do you, the first question is get experience, but how do you get the experience if you're not being exposed to it? And that's not always possible. Okay, in that case, well, what training can you get, in addition to being an engineer? I think people management. So there's 2 tracks for engineers usually in a good company. You can carry on developing your career as a senior engineer, go further up that career path, not be penalized financially, but then you may never manage people. Or there's the people leaders. I think people leadership is almost a completely different career, because you're doing quite a lot of different things to what a standard engineer would do. Larger companies may have internal training schemes for aspiring managers. In Admiral, we had ILM. You know, ask about what opportunities there are in larger companies. Smaller companies, I would say, think outside the box. You know, is there something you can go on that the company would pay for? If not, would they give you the time back for you to do it yourself? If it's no to all those, you might want to consider some of your choices about who you're working for. Another thing to consider is getting a mentor or a coach. I was lucky enough in Confused to have a couple of people coach me. I actually rocked up to the CEO one day and asked her, you know, can you get me a coach? And I think that does two things. It signals your intention that you are ambitious, because people don't always read other people's ambitions, and they may not in this environment that you're speaking about where people are working from home. And secondly, it was the direct benefit of having that coaching opportunity. So having trustworthy people, maybe you can't get a coach or a mentor, maybe you can have a peer group, which you can, you know, people at the same level as you that you can trust to sound off against. And that goes back again to building a network. You know, how can you probably want people outside your current firm that you can trust to talk about. There are more and more schemes as well for lead engineers and people aspiring to be CTOs and stuff. You know, if you look on LinkedIn, some of them are subscription based. You know, some of them are free. So, you know, there's lots of stuff out there that you could kind of try and pursue if you're ambitious.
Sounds really good advice. Just to go back on a couple of things you said then. So go back to the first point. You kind of said there's kind of two career route paths to go down as an engineer, the people route or going down the more technical route. What have you seen when you've developed people and taken them down one of those two paths? How do people kind of decide when is the right time to kind of split off? And I suppose to some people it's really obvious, look, people route, tech route, but I'm sure to some people they're probably sat there in a real quandary over which path to go down, because I'm sure there's some people that love tech, love what they do, but also kind of quite like the idea of getting to that sort of head of people management type role. So what advice have you given to people that you've seen over your career that you'd share?
I think don't think that any choice is set in stone. You know, most people, I think the riskiest, well, they're both risky, I guess, to some extent, you know, staying in one or the other. There'll always be the question of, should I have gone into the leadership if you never try it? I think certainly try it if you think it would be a good thing to do, and if you're keen to do it. You know, you get exposed to lots of different challenges there that you wouldn't be exposed to as an engineer. One of the hardest ones, I think, is motivating people. You know, you have to be someone who is prepared to put things aside. And, you know, there's the quote that positivity isn't naivety, it's a sign of leadership. And you'll probably know that as much as anyone, Carl, you know, owning a business and running a company like yours. You've got to lead by example. And that takes time. But the reason I say it's not in stone is, you know, the best companies would allow people to cross the paths. You know, if you do it for 12 months and you decide, well, actually it's not for me, then there should be a place for you at the table on the other side. You know, it would be wrong of anyone to not make that happen. So again, you know, people do different things at different times in their lives as well. You know, I've got a development lead who took a bit of time out of people leadership for a while, you know, with his kids and stuff. So it's not one or the other. I would say try and work for a company that gives you the flexibility to do either, and to change.
That makes sense. And then one of the things you mentioned, everyone talks about this, and I kind of feel bad because I've never actually asked. So you're going to be the guinea pig on this question. Sorry. Everyone always talks about get a mentor, get a coach, do this, that, and it all sounds great, right? And I imagine if you're sat there as you are now, a director of something, and kind of going off to approach a big hitting CTO and going, hey, Mr. Big hitting CTO, can you mentor me? They're probably going to go, oh yeah, maybe I might do, because you've proven you've got some credibility and gravitas. So, but I imagine sat there as kind of like a midweight, an aspiring lead dev, it must be quite nerve-wracking. How would you actually go and approach? So imagine you're sat there, because you would be the person I'm sure loads of people would love to approach to be mentored or coached by. as that person, how would you want to see them approach you? What would work? What wouldn't work? And what did it? And is it someone in their organisation, outside of their organisation? How do you even go about? Because it's all well and good. Go get a coach, go get a mentor, but you can't just go onto Google and type in tech mentor and someone
No,
comes up.
no. Well, obviously there are sort of professional exec coaches out there. I wouldn't know what you'll get from that. I honestly don't know how you would go about approaching someone cold. That probably wouldn't be a wise thing to do. You'd probably want to strike up a relationship with someone. Um, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, if sort of a coach is a CTO per se. I've got some great coaching out of. I remember one person. She was a director of HR. So I think you need to think about. Well, another thing is to think about coaching yourself as well, because you understand the mechanics of it. Because you may choose somebody and you think, oh, that would be a great coach for me, but actually they might be an appalling coach, So um, again, going back to the GET training, part of the leadership training you could do is learning how to coach other people. ILM, for example, do a coaching course, so you could learn how to coach yourself for starters, and learn more about the dynamics of effective coaching before you then try and get reverse coached by other people, and then what you can get most out of. But then I guess, do you want somebody within your company coaching you? Maybe you need to broaden your network then, if you want to reach out to other people. But as far as being approached, it can be quite flattering. So I wouldn't be put off, because these people do like to help. I've been coaching for an organization. I won't name the name, but they do a lot in the diversity space. Improving. I think we do have a problem in engineering with lack of diversity, and it's a little bit that we can do to try and help that. So there are also organizations that you could try and join, particularly if you come from an underrepresented group,
Yep.
and get that coaching yourself as well.
Definitely. Look, and that kind of leads nicely into kind of the next segue of, I suppose, what I was keen just to kind of talk about a little bit. And I think whilst COVID's been really tough for a lot of people, I've been fortunate enough, you're fortunate enough to kind of work in the tech industry. And the tech industry has probably been one of a couple that through the last few years has actually done really well, and grown. And at the moment, it's kind of in a space where no one's ever experienced anything like it, which is great. But I think what also that opens up then is, unfortunately, there were lots of other industries that did really struggle,
Yep.
and businesses are closed, people have lost jobs, lost careers. And I think actually it is a really exciting time to be looking at kind of people changing careers, people that maybe never thought about a career in IT and what that could offer. And I think that there's kind of some really interesting stuff like the boot camps, code academies. But I suppose what's your view and opinion you'd share with somebody who maybe has had another career and thinking about coming into tech, or never even thought about tech and is kind of going, oh, what is that? What would you say to them? And I think again, sort of around on the same question, you can weave it in as well. We spoke about kind of more diversity and inclusion. I think the new working world and the flexibility, I think, opens it up to a whole other range of people.
Yeah.
What's your opinions, views, and advice you'd share around that?
Yeah, absolutely. There has never been a better time to join tech. As you only have to look at the market at the moment. This is the big contradiction. We've got a huge shortfall of talent in the industry that we can't fill quickly enough. And as a result, with any supply and demand problem, look, housing or any other industry, it's driving up wages. So great time to join tech. Now, the challenge is, how do you pivot into a tech career, which is slightly different. I think the big challenge that I'm observing when I speak to people in that position is the signposting. So how can I get a comprehensive understanding of all the different ways of getting trained? You know, there isn't like one directory or website. There are different schemes, some of which have got a sting in the tail, you know, some of which you might find you have to outlay a lot of money for, like a boot camp. Then there are other schemes which are kind of part funded by, you know, sort of universities or government schemes. Um, I would exercise caution before blowing a lot of money on a boot camp. You know, try, as with any service, try and find feedback from other people who rate it, and you know, speak to real people that have got real jobs off the end of it. Because otherwise, you know, I certainly would be risk averse about spending, you know, 12 grand or something on an 8 week boot camp or a 12 week boot camp. But there is a place for them, definitely, you know, and there are some good, really good ones. And I've hired people who've come off boot camps, you know, that, you know, really good people who had no technical skills before that, and then they join at junior dev level, and that's definitely helping the industry. The other one is, you know, people who can afford a degree. I would say, you know, keep your eyes open, because some of the more traditional university degrees are being challenged by more innovative ones, where they're much more vocational. Like, they'll teach you in an office, and you'll learn Agile, you'll learn Scrum, you'll develop, you'll code stuff. Some people do traditional computer science courses and they don't even code. You know, unbelievable. So that's another thing.
Yeah,
Some of it goes back to what we were saying about earlier, is even at the end of it, someone's going to have to take a risk on you. So, you know, it is about how you come across. It is about your temperament. It is about your personality. My main gripe is lack of signposting. So how do you tell people what's on offer, and then making sure that people make the right choices based on their own risk? You know, I certainly wouldn't want somebody to put themselves into a position of debt and not get a job at the end of it.
but I think as well, the other thing I see a lot of, and is that you mentioned it then, sort of the whole agile piece. And actually, you don't have to be a software engineer to work in tech anymore. You don't have to have that mindset of what people probably imagine a software engineer come from: a computer science background, mathematics, science background. Yet let's go into IT, because as you mentioned, look at BAs, product owners, scrum masters. They are much more around the softer skills, the people skills, the comm skills that can be your entry point into a career in tech, into a business in tech. Then learn more about software engineering, and as you said, you can cross train, move across. So I think the more all of us can do to kind of, I like that word, signpost what is out there and what is available, especially because I think we're only going to get one chance of doing it with this market we find ourselves in. And I mean, I don't work in IT, but I work a lot in that space, and I think it's a brilliant career to have. And there's so many interesting and diverse businesses out there that I think the more we can all do, and what you're doing, and I was going to mention it, but you brought it up in your mentoring role for one of our slightly bigger competitors, is really impressive. So fair play to you, mate. I think you're doing a great job with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't think of that, and that's definitely a good route in for lots of people, isn't it? The non-coding roles. Yeah.
So I think the more of that, the better. Right. I know you're a little bit pushed for time, so you're going to get a couple of quick fire questions now, right? And then I'll let you run off. So best book or podcast that you've watched that's tech related. I'm going to test you now.
To be honest, I don't really read many books. I got a subscription to Blinkist over Christmas, which is it's an app which it summarizes books.
That sounds good.
So you know, it will convert a book into like 5 pages and basically take out the salient parts. As a developer, there was anything by Robert C. Martin, Uncle Bob. Was brilliant, and this goes back to that point about software craftsmanship. So they're quite old books now these days, but they totally are still absolutely relevant for how to code well. Podcasts, I don't know. There's just so much out there at the moment, and it's difficult not to get overwhelmed with kind of choice.
Yeah.
I kind of dip in and out of podcasts, but not really on the tech side. I haven't really, nothing's really stuck on the tech side for me, I'm afraid.
What's the other pod? Is there a podcast to go to then in the car or on a journey somewhere?
I've been listening to The Fall of Civilizations, which is about like the Incas and the Aztecs and stuff. And I guess it's prescient at the moment with COVID, seeing COVID and Brexit, but we won't talk about politics.
We'll save that for the next one. Good. All right. Best piece of advice you'd give to someone who's kind of aspiring for a career in tech?
Aspiring for a career in tech, you can do it. Don't think that anyone in tech is like superhuman genius. Everybody is normal, and don't feel that you're under-equipped or it's impossible for you. I think anyone can work in tech.
Yeah. Okay. And then the final one to really get your brain going. With hindsight, if you could go back to Chris Lewis back at the end of his masters or back at OBS and give him one piece of advice in his ear, what would you say?
Do the law. No, I'm only joking. No, that's a difficult one. I don't know. I think there was something on the other day about the power of regret, and we shouldn't seek to minimize regret. So everybody has regrets in their lives. I wouldn't go back to my old self and try and avoid any, because I think that's part of what makes us human. So yeah, I would just go back and tell him, it'll be all right, son. It'll all be all right.
Good. I like that answer. That is a good one. Look, thank you very much. I think it's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed talking to you and hearing the story and your insight. And yeah, it's been really good. And we finished with 5 minutes to spare, which is...
Oh, look at that, Carl. That's brilliant. Perfect.
No worries.